Thank you, thank you. It's great to be here. Great to see a lot of students here. And so when we talk, I'm going to talk about 20, 25 minutes. We'll have a lot of time for discussion, so I expect questions. I'm going to call on students, okay? And there'll be a little quiz, and then just kidding. Okay. So I'm a teacher. I've been in classrooms a lot, and so I'm very happy to be here because I really support classical schools. I support classical education. I think it is a key to the renovation, the preservation of our country and of Western civilization as well. So talking now about that title, Silicon Valley hates your kids. Why would you say this? Because Silicon Valley produces so many fun tools that young people particularly love. Well, that's exactly the problem. I've got a 17-year-old, so I've been watching him as the digital culture enters into his life. But let me give you a couple of facts to know about the tools, okay? And I think that because you attend a school like this one, you have a bit more of a critical perspective than most of your teens do on these tools. But a couple of things. You know that when you look at the phone and you look at that light and that glow, you know it keeps you awake. That light actually activates parts of your brain that produce stimulation. It's harder to go to sleep after you've been looking at that screen for an hour than it would be if you're reading a book, let's say, or a magazine, or just sitting there with your eyes closed listening to music. Now, this is a bad thing for young people who've got to get up in the morning, they've got to go to school, they've got to go do their homework, get up and go do soccer, and they've got to get to sleep. Silicon Valley doesn't want you to go to sleep. Okay? They don't want you to turn that phone off, because the more you use the phone, the more money they make. It's that simple. So they like that light, keeping your brain activated. Now, if you doubt that the Silicon Valley designers there in the Bay Area of San Francisco, where Facebook and Google and all the rest are located, centered around Stanford University, which is where so much happened. The first email was sent between Stanford and UCLA in 1969. It only was a few letters long, but it was the first communication of that kind. I think it was 69. But you know that the guys who design these tools, the video games and the social media, you know they don't let their own kids use screens very much. They design the tools for the kids, but they don't let their own kids use them, or they restrict the use highly. Steve Jobs, Steve Jobs, one of the titans of technology in the 20th century, he didn't let his kids do much screens at home. Okay? Chris Anderson was the editor of Wired magazine. Wired magazine was in the 90s the huge cheerleader for digital technology, the digital revolution. He said a few years ago, listen, these tools are so bad for kids because when they get on the video games, the games are activating the same centers in the brain that are activated by cocaine, okay, by drugs. Okay? When they designed these tools, the Silicon Valley people hired psychologists who were experts in addiction to show them how to design the websites and the games to produce addiction. Okay? This was not known widely. It's now widely known. And this is why if you go to Silicon Valley, the leading people, they send their kids to private schools like the Waldorf schools that are very, very low tech. They don't want their own kids on these tools. There you have it. Okay? We don't need any other proof that Silicon Valley has bad designs on the kids, on you guys, that they make money off of you getting on the screen and staying there for hours and hours. They've designed the tools so that they have a psychological effect, so that when, for instance, a guy goes and starts playing a video game, 3 hours will go by, and if he finishes and gets up, you ask him, how long will you be playing? He'll say, about 45 minutes. And he's not lying, because he really thinks that only 45 minutes passed in that 3 hours time. The psychologists actually call it slow time. It's when you're involved in an activity that time seems to slow down. So you're on there for hours? Nope, only seems like 45 minutes. Now, this is intentional. Okay? They really mean to affect young people's behavior in this way. And you can look at websites and see how they do it. You can look at LinkedIn. LinkedIn, probably, I don't know if LinkedIn really appeals to young people, but you can see it in older people. Just look at the way photographs are scrolled down and the way they identify them as connections. I won't go into that, but that's a case where they want to hold you. They're appealing to you in a way to get you, oh, I want to stay here. I want to look more and more and more. And it will go on forever on LinkedIn. The photographs, the photos of people, it'll go on for 2 hours if you want. Okay? And it will not seem like it's 2 hours when you're on it. Okay, so we can talk about more about that, about why they would be doing this, and just how phenomenally successful they are. All right. The two books, right? The first book, which had this mean title, The Dumbest Generation, right? How the digital age stupefies young Americans and jeopardizes our future, or Don't Trust Anyone Under 30. That's the final subtitle. That joke goes back to the 60s for those of you too young. But the idea there was the millennials, who were 15 years old, 12 years old in 2007, 8, 9. They dove into the digital tools. Okay? Any of the kids know, when did Facebook start? You guys know when Facebook began? Any guesses? 2003. Yes, sir. 2001. 2006. Well, it was devised in 2005. It went big in 2006. Now, MySpace, I don't know how popular MySpace is. It's more like a music thing now. MySpace was the first big social media thing for the young. That, I believe, was 02 or 03. Okay? But seems like eons ago, right? But Facebook went really national in 2006. What about Twitter? Anyone, a date for Twitter?
2009.
8. But in 2009 is when it really took off, right? It's when when these things are devised and they got to spread the word, right? They're doing the codes and everything, the technology, and then they market them. Okay, but those were the years when the social media started. The video games started to get much more sophisticated as well, and the millennials were the ones who were, quote, the early adopters, the digital natives, they were called, because they're so young, they're playing with these tools, they're experimenting with them, and they are getting to the point where they don't really have a lot of memory of life before the personal computer. So they were the first generation really to grow up with these tools, and they adopted them. And the idea among a lot of people, like the Wired magazine crowd, was the millennials are going to lead America into the 21st century. The digital revolution is happening. People like me, the boomers, We're still tied to those old ways of doing things. We're not quite so flexible and so innovative. We're not experimenting with these tools. The millennials are, and they are going to crush when they grow older. They are going to be the most educated, the most ambitious, the most adept, the most innovative, and the most successful generation in human history because they have mastered the digital tools. That was the hype. Okay? Well, my point, and a few others argued around this time, was no, this is awful. This is terrible for 15-year-olds. It is horrible for them to turn to these little screens and to spend so much time on them. It is terrible for them to send 3,300 text messages in a month, which is what they were doing by 2010. It's terrible for them to sleep. 85% of them would sleep with the cell phone within arm's length by their pillow on. So that, a photo comes through at 2 in the morning, ding, I want to wake up and see what's going on. What happened at the party? What's the gossip that's going to take place? This is terrible, particularly because of what we would call the opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is when you do something, and it's not the cost of that, it's the cost of not doing the other thing. And so what we got with this huge transfer of attention and time over to the little screen, the loss of book reading, the loss of conversation with parents, the loss of looking at some newspapers now and then or some magazines. All those reading habits, the intellectual habits, went way down during those years when the digital age exploded. And so what we got were millennials who were amazing with the screens. Their thumbs were very quick, and they grew up. Okay? And the predictions turned out, of their extraordinary ambitions and accomplishments, the predictions turned out not to pan out. And that's why I did this second book just this year. The Dumbest Generation Grows Up. And what happened? What happened? And I'm going to wrap it up, and then we'll have discussion. What happened was they spent all their time on their phones, going through the screens, going through the social media, playing Fortnite, whatever. Actually, Fortnite wasn't invented yet, but things like that. And they didn't do as much reading as they did before. They didn't study as much history as they did before. They didn't get what you're getting here, a classical formation in really at all. And now, what do we see in millennials now that they're in their 30s? Right? They're their late 20s, 30s up to 40. How are the millennials doing? They were so confident, they were so ambitious back in 2008. Now, we're 14 years later. Here is what the surveys of millennials show. 1, widespread unhappiness and disappointment. There is a sour mood that prevails among people in early middle age in America today. They have higher ratings of what's called social mistrust. Okay? They have more mistrust of their fellow Americans than any older age group. Okay? They believe that certain opinions, certain ideas should get you canceled. Okay? They have high levels of intolerance for dissent, okay, which is one of the fundamental freedoms in our country. Right? You can disagree, and you shouldn't be punished for that disagreement. The millennials believe you should, and that's why they lead the way on cancel culture. Now, why has this happened? I mean, they had all the tools. They can express themselves through them. They can form their own networks. They have constant contact. They have social media so they don't have to be alone. As Mark Zuckerberg put it once, we're trying to make it so you never have to be lonely ever again. Okay? You can always make contact, with the phone in your room. It can be a social space, not an isolation for you. What happened was precisely what I said a few minutes ago. When you grow up, when you go through adulthood, disappointments happen. You don't get into that college you really wanted to get into. You got to settle for your second or your third choice. You didn't make the team you wanted to make the team. The girl you were in love with, she's not in love with you. The guy you're in love with, he's not in love with you. Okay? You grow up, you leave college, you don't get that perfect job that you strove for. So you've got to settle for something. You can't live in that cool, hip place you wanted to live. Okay? You don't have enough money, to do all the things that you want to do. I mean, I'm just listing these things. I'm not saying they all happen to you inevitably. But that this is life. This is ordinary existence. Ups and downs are going to happen. Now, the thing is, when the millennials were 15, those kinds of things could be shielded. They could go in their bedrooms, okay, turn on all the equipment. They got the phone, the computer, or the laptop, the tablet. They could have their music going, they have the TV on, and they could make contact with other friends, Facebook, texting. And if they didn't like something, if someone said something that they didn't like, well, you just block that number. You get that disagreeable thing out of your room. If music comes on and you don't want to listen to it, you just turn it off. You could fabricate your own reality with these tools in that room. Okay? So that those disappointments that are going to hit in adulthood, they didn't have to hit you so much. You could exercise control over your world here. Now, they grow up, that doesn't work. When you're 25 years old, you've got bills to pay, you worry about money, you worry about maybe healthcare costs, your boyfriend is not, making you happy. Where do you go? Where do you go? Where does the 33-year-old millennial go? Does the 33-year-old average millennial do what we just did? Pray? No. Most of them didn't grow up with any religion. No organized worship, no regular church, temple, whatever, mosque attendance. Most millennials don't have God in their lives. Okay? So they can't sit there and look at something in their life going badly, and they can't read any of the Gospels. Okay? They can't read the Beatitudes and take any comfort from that. They don't have religion. They don't have country. Most millennials do not describe themselves as patriotic. They don't feel that they belong to a country in which they can take pride, in which they feel themselves, this is my identity, I'm an American. Okay? That doesn't affect them. They didn't absorb that kind of patriotism. They'll go with sacrifice, commitment, and give you a place, give you an identity. This is something who I am. They didn't have that, and a lot of them come from broken homes, dysfunctional families. It's a whole other issue. But on the loss of reading, what didn't they get? They didn't get the great stories, the great heroes, the great love affairs, the great betrayals, the great sacrifices that you find in literature, in art, in history. Okay? They have disappointment. How much would it have helped them if they'd absorbed the lessons of the book of Job about disappointment? Or if they'd watched Death of a Salesman, right? There's middle-aged disappointment right there. Love, rejection. if they read the story of how Calypso feels when Odysseus leaves her? Okay? How does Dido feel when Aeneas takes off? Right? How do Tristan and Isolde, how do they absorb their disappointment in their great love affair? They didn't get that formation. They don't have that reservoir of, again, characters, heroes, events, great words, great lines of verse, right? Great bits from the Bible that would give them, again, comfort, understanding, right? And it's sort of a background knowledge in which they can absorb the not so happy experiences of life as a grown-up. So what you guys are getting now with this kind of curriculum at this school, it's going to be really helpful to you 20 years from now, right? I mean, you're learning it now, you think, okay, these are great works, but when you are grown-ups, right, you're going to find, you're going to have a lot of these books and stories on the shelf. They're going to be in your head, okay? And you're going to find that they are going to be, kind of a context, a habitat, an environment for you to pass through this world and your mortal career. And they're going to, again, give you a framework to take in the things that go up and the things that go down without the kind of bitterness, the absence of meaning that our secular, unclassically educated millennials go through. They've got their phones. The Facebook doesn't work for them much anymore. It was so cool back in 2010. I'm 33. I can't really be acting this way. It's just not pleasing me. But how about opening some Shakespeare, right? How about reading some of the epistles, right? Paul's epistles, right? How about listening to Mozart's Requiem or Wagner's Tristan? Okay? These are the things that are going to serve you as what? Wisdom, right? As truth, as profundity, as passion, when you are much older than you are now. So, the fate of the millennials, the unhappiness of the millennials, who, by the way, they're not getting married at nearly the rate older generations are, they're not having children, that's a sign they don't see a future. They don't see their lives in constructive ways. They're not giving themselves to something else. And not having anything to give yourself to, it's an unhappy condition. So, the fate of the millennials, the outcome laid out in this book, and the fact that their teachers didn't give them, right, that classical education background, it's a warning, right? It is a reason to keep up the reading, right? Fill in the gaps with Homer, and Virgil and Ovid and Sophocles and Plato and the old, Job and Ecclesiastes and Genesis and the Gospels, all the rest. And know how lucky you are to be able to pray at night. The unhappy millennial can't pray. That's not an option. I know I was a militant, miserable atheist for a long time, okay? And that wasn't available to me. The ability to pray, to bring your experiences to the Lord, what a wonderful option that is for you at night. So I'll stop on that note. I think I talked about 25 minutes. We can open it up for discussion, observations, and whatever you like.